Thank you very much, and good morning, engineers.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your time. Now, I'll start with the obvious general question. What's your assessment of the 10th Assembly under the leadership of Godswill Akpabio? So many Nigerians have termed the 10th Assembly a rubber stamp assembly. They say the executive asks and the legislature delivers all the time. What do you make of the 10th National Assembly?
Well, that is what is referred to in leadership as integrity. Now, integrity means the moral disposition of a leader and his character. The National Assembly, before we even proceed, we have to take a close review of who are the principal actors holding leadership position and what is their reputation. Of course, the Senate President, you will have to interrogate the process with which he even became a senator. The process that produced him was challenged to the level of the Supreme Court, and it raised a very serious integrity issue. Even at the valedictory session of the 9th Senate, Senator Rochas Okocha, jokingly in the National Assembly, said the Senate President and the former Senate President, Lawan, should tell them how, after contesting the presidential election, they found their way back into the Senate. That is a very serious credibility issue about the electoral process and how the Senate President ultimately emerged. So having put this into proper perspective, can you expect anything short of the process that produced this type of leadership? So the fundamental challenge is that the Senate President has excess baggages of reputation and credibility question hanging on his neck, like the sword of Damocles. Can Nigerians expect somebody with such reputational question to provide leadership? The question is no. I remember when I was a minister between 2015 to 2019, when the former EFCC boss, Magu, it was on the national television where he was addressing Nigerians and saying boxes of dollars were recovered in Uyo presidential lodge, traceable to the former governor. He was invited by EFCC. At a point in time, he said he was not well, and since he became Senate President, he has not gone there again. So I think Nigerians are expecting miracle to happen in the camp of the devil. And the miracles that will only come out from that place will be the miracle of disgrace, controversies, and challenges as we are facing. So I think we should not expect much from the Senate because the fish will have to be rotten at the head before the body. So if the leadership has credibility and reputational question, of course, the National Assembly will have to graduate from a mere rubber stamp to choristers of the executive. So once the executives initiate a song, they all synchronize and sing louder. That is the jeopardy of the current 10th Assembly. It's very intolerant. So all those that seek within the system to try to guide it, they descended heavily on them. They are either suspended, they are clamped down on. So all forms of abnormalities that is unknown to legislative tradition historically is what we are dealing with, but it has to do with the quality of leadership in place.
All right. Mr. DeLong, but in defense of the Senate President, strong supporters of his have come out to say that it is because he is a Senate President from the South, and that's the more reason why he is being pushed to leave that seat as a Senate President. I mean, they're all equal, but it's the first amongst equal. What do you make of this tribal narrative? Do you think it holds water?
You know, it is just a deliberate attempt to try to drag the integrity of that song to the first, the Senate President of the Second Republic, Senator Wayas, was from the South, and he has been rated as one of the best Senate Presidents that Nigeria ever produced. Is the South of Senator Wayas different from the South of Akpabio? I think these are just apologies and beneficiaries of a very bad and terrible situation that they are trying to recruit and engage a larger spectrum of the political space so that they will reduce the issues from the character of the individual involved to a community question. And this is how Nigerians deal with situations like this. I remember a governor was arrested, a former governor was arrested, and the people demonstrated and said, yes, he is a thief, but he's our own thief. So this is what they are trying to play out. But I think the people of the South, historically, go back to look at people like Okotebo, look at great leaders like Melford Kilo, look at the first the executive governor from 1999 to 2007, Obong Victor. These are credible leaders. Are they not from the South? Why are they not behaving? Why did they not behave like Akpabio? So this is just an unacceptable attempt to try to disseminate the gravity of what is being discussed at the national conversation.
All right. There have been a number of suspensions that have occurred or happened at the Senate. We've had Senator Abdul Ningi, but let's focus on the most recent suspension, the suspension of Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan. The Senate says it's because of, unruly behavior that, came up as a result of the seating arrangement disagreement. Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan, on the other hand, disagrees and thinks that it's directly linked to the sexual harassment allegations. First of all, how does this reflect? We've seen she's granted several interviews. The matter has become not just a conversation here in Nigeria, but outside the country. How does this reflect on the Senate? And how should the Senate have handled this better to ensure transparency and accountability?
If we are familiar with legislative tradition, we will agree that this 10th National Assembly has derailed into the abyss. Fighting, shouting, throwing of chairs at each other is a legislative tradition globally. It's not even limited to Nigeria. So the offense of an unruly behavior is very, very strange to legislative culture. The legislature is a miniature of the larger political community reduced to representation. Therefore, the behavior as it is expected of people when you gather them, the competitive nature of trying to make sure that my interest gains acceptance will always play out. I have watched the British Parliament in action where they were on each other's neck, pushing, fighting. I have watched so many of such legislative acts in Asia, in Europe, and even in Africa. So it is to me it's very strange that the 10th Assembly, because of its very desperate attempt to impose tyranny in place of democracy, is redefining every act into a crime. The question now is, why was Natasha suspended? To me, I followed it carefully, and my opinion on this issue is that the 10th Assembly, the Senate mismanaged the issue of Natasha. In the National Assembly, it is known that communications are always in writing. Even when I was a minister, every invitation is communicated to me in writing. Nobody called me. They write. And that is in accordance with the rules of the Senate. Now, the missing gap in this issue of relocation of Natasha's seat is that the Senate President did not establish whether Natasha was communicated in writing that her seat was changed before the following day she refused to relocate. In absence of formal communication, Akpabio cannot be a village headmaster armed with horse whip, sitting with a Miloko cap, and then looking at the senators, whom he is one among equal, and will be telling, my friend, go away from here, go and sit here. It is not done that way. He became a Senate President by law, and he must govern by law. So that is the beginning of the problem of this Natasha issue. She wasn't communicated previously as required by the rules. So the first victim of disobedience of law is the Senate President and not Natasha. Now, when Natasha refused to comply, Natasha was defending the rules of the National Assembly and defending the rule of law. Then comes the issue of her petition, because thereafter she submitted a petition. And she said, I have been bottling so many things over the months, over 11 months. But I think from what I am seeing playing out is I am being victimized because I refuse to surrender my body in bargain of favor from the Senate President. The allegation is very weighty. Would the making of that allegation, the Senate President would have stepped down, allowed the Deputy Senate President to preside for transparency and accountability of the process. But because the Senate President had something to hide and a cover-up, he ignored this fundamental aspect of law. Sadly, he belonged to this, our community of lawyers. He sat in judgment and he dramatized the issue, ignoring the allegation or trying to distract Nigerians. He went ahead to use his hatchet man, the chairman of the Ethics Committee, to now preside over what many senators have come out now to say, no, the signatures used in that committee to arrive at the recommendation of suspending the Natasha was extracted from attendance. We never physically participated. So, at the end of it all, you will discover that in trying to cover up this weighty allegation and shut her up from speaking out.
All right, seem to have a little connectivity glitch there, but I'm sure we're getting the point made by former minister there, talking about the incident and the situation that took place, which has indeed made the headlines in the past few weeks and possibly a month and counting, concerning the Senate President and, of course, the sitting senator who has now been suspended, Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan. But then again, you know, but okay, we have him back. We're told we have him back. Binga.
Now, yes. So the Senate President now orchestrated the suspension and even you could see how he did not even pretend in handling it. She's suspended for 6 months. She is also to lose her security. She should not be seen between the vicinity of the National Assembly. All these rights are rights of a senator. Suspension cannot take it away. And the question now legally is whether the Senate has power to suspend the representation of the people for 6 months. The answer is no. There are judicial decisions to this. Their rules provide that they can only suspend for a maximum of 14 days. In the case of Omogege and Ndume, the courts had clearly laid down the laws governing the suspension. So the Senate, again, in violation of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, principles of democracy and the rule of law, long-term tradition of legislature, embarked now on a voyage of vendetta, suspended her for 6 months. So this illegality and affront on the Constitution is very, very unhealthy to democracy. We are practicing constitutional democracy, where Section 1 of the Constitution is very clear. The Constitution is supreme. Section 1, Section 2 says nobody will exercise any authority in Nigeria except as provided for by this Constitution. The authority being exercised by Akpabio is a stranger to the Constitution, is an enemy to the Constitution, is a threat to the Constitution, and indeed is an affront to democratic tenets.
Now, Mr. DeLong, you were a member of the executive in the last administration under the government of President Muhammadu Buhari. In your opinion, do you think the current National Assembly is effectively fulfilling its role in providing checks and balances to the executive branch? If you do recall, during the presentation of the 2025 budget at the National Assembly, the Senate President Godswill Akpabio led members of the National Assembly in chorus and singing Mr. President's campaign song, "On Your Mandate, We Shall Stand." What do you make of that? And especially, also, how do you assess the National Assembly's checks and balances in light of recent approval, such as the state of emergency in Rivers State, and also allegations of financial inducement to influence legislative decisions?
I was actually embarrassed when the 2025 budget was presented. And I think that song that was sung, if I hear them well, maybe Nigerians would hear it the way I had it. But the way I had the song and I understood it, it was like, "On your dollar we shall stand, on your dollar we shall stand, on your dollar, Tinubu, on your dollar we shall stand." That wasn't the song. But of course, we are dealing with a state of abnormality. Everything goes. If the National Assembly were to sing, the best song could have been the national anthem, which would have been in the honor of the country and in mobilizing Nigerians to appreciate their democracy. Let us not now look at, okay, when I was in a federal executive, we had one of the best Senate under Bukola Saraki, because that Senate gave us a very serious check and balance. And of course, we sat up as members of the federal executive, even though many people who are anti-democratic elements considered the attitude of the Senate as hostile. But those of us who are Democrats, I mean, we appreciated them as investing their interest in trying to make sure that our democracy is guided by the rule of law. So that, to me, in my opinion, was one of the best Senate, even though we had it very rough. Many a times we have to sit up to try to defend our actions before the Senate, but it was quite healthy for democracy. Now, the approval of the declaration of state of emergency and the approval of the state of emergency is one of the worst things that ever happened to any country, a democratic country in the world. Section 305 is very categorical as to the processes which a state of emergency can be declared. The factors that can initiate the exercise of that power is also provided for under Section 305. Now, it is either there is a territorial threat, there is national health challenge, then there is also an internal security challenge. Upon the maturity of any of these situations, the president can declare a state of emergency. The governor, even on his own, if these factors exist, can declare state of emergency and invite the president to exercise his power of dealing with situation and mobilizing requisite forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to deal with the situation. So these provisions are very, very clear. But what we saw playing out in Rivers is that we welcome with a president who declared a state of emergency, published it in a federal gazette, and sent it to the National Assembly. The Constitution requires the National Assembly to rectify it within 48 hours. The intendment of the constitutional drafters is that within 24 hours, every member of the National Assembly to take, which is the requirement, that is present, should have been able to speak for or against. Then from there, they will proceed into voting. And the requirement of the National Assembly is that two-thirds majority of the members of the National Assembly, which is distinguishable from two-thirds of the National Assembly members present. Now, the president deposited the declaration. It has not been verified. He proceeded in one of the cubicles in his office, himself and the chief of staff, so in an administrator, even when the state of emergency had not been rectified by the National Assembly, which sends the message that my boys in the Senate will definitely do my bidding, so I don't have to waste time. So the administrator was sworn in and was on his way to Port Harcourt even before the National Assembly, in a dramatic twist, adopted another procedure unknown to law. Those that gather till today, we do not have record of how many of them, which is an important requirement of Section 305. And then the strange procedure introduced there is now the using of a voice vote. And the voice vote is what the 10th Assembly is generally using. Anything they want to do against the Nigerian people, 2 or 3 members will gather in either the House of Reps or Senate with the Senate or House of Reps leadership in place, and they will say, oh, well, Nigerians today, we are going, there's a motion for Nigerians, 500 Nigerians to be sold to a foreign country. Who are against it? Who are for it? But the eyes have it, and they will start rolling Nigerians. So they adopted the same method. And in a kangaroo manner of a very jungle legislative procedure, they now rectified it. And subsequently now emerged the allegations of inducement which they have been admitting in denial. Because the spokesperson of the House of Representatives who said, we were given money, but it was for Salah celebration. Now, his response, the gift, came when the issue of state of emergency was being deliberated in the National Assembly. And Salah was a week or a week plus 5. Why was the gift of Salah appropriate during the deliberation and ratification of the state of emergency? They are just taking Nigerians for right, and they assume that all of us are just morons whose experiences in education was just a wild goose chase experience. Otherwise, those stories, even you cannot tell them to the Marine. But that is what we're dealing with.
Well, we want to thank you so much for your time. I think we've gotten your feedback, especially looking at these issues, state of the nation, and most importantly, our focus has been on the National Assembly. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Solomon DeLong. We've had a very, very interesting conversation with you. Thanks for your time.